Okay, fine. So starting to look at this Java on the server side with respect to HTTP rather, fine. So it's like, yes, on client side, we could write an application, fine. We can create a HTTP request, send a request, get a response, look at the response, parse the response, content from the response, use that data. Okay. From server side point of view, let's see what exactly happens. What Java offers on the server side. And so on server side, for developing application, here we use, there are certain terms which we'll have to first familiarize with. Okay. What we have here for the server side in Java is known as, we have this, Java has various specifications. So there's one specification called the servlet specification. Fine. So Java on server side, yes, will be mainly dictated by servlet specification initially. Fine. So let's start with the servlet specification. What is this servlet specification about, right? So what we have here is, uh, we got a concept of a web application. Okay, so one is servlet specification. We have a concept of a web application. Okay, fine. So for this, let's look at what exactly happens and what would happen when someone would, how a client would use, it's about client and server. So client side you have seen, it's a server, right? So what would happen on the server? Fine, let's see, look at that aspect. Okay. So looking at the server side, okay, on server, yeah. So from client point of view, yes, what is the client going to do? What does the client do? Uses a browser and keys in a URL. Okay, so fine, he keys in a URL. So let's look at a typical URL. Fine, what does a URL look like? Okay, HTTP colon slash slash some host. Okay, there'll be some host mentioned, and then slash. Okay, optionally a port number may also be specified. Yeah, you may specify colon and a port number also, that's optional. Okay, but then you have a slash followed by what? Some resource, path to a resource. Okay, that path is a hierarchical thing. You have some name slash something slash something. Okay, this is a typical URL looking like. Okay, so what exactly happens when we do this in the browser? First thing, this part, okay, after slash slash, this part is initially used for identifying a server machine and making a connection. So it has identified, yes, it identifies that there is some server here. Okay, the browser has identified, and let's say this is our browser, fine, where the URL was given. The browser would make a connection to a HTTP. It is expecting a HTTP server to be running there. So it is making connection to that HTTP server. And it's making a connection to the HTTP server, and then on this connection, it is sending a HTTP request. We are expecting a HTTP request currently. Okay, fine. So then it's making a HTTP request. Okay. So yes, using a HTTP request, you understand the format of the HTTP request. It will say get and would specify, because this part has been used for identifying the server machine. Okay, identifying the HTTP server. This part was used. Now it uses this part, this entire part. Okay, fine. So this is what is sent to the server. What is sent to the server? Fine, it would just say get, and this part is our resource. Okay, host colon port slash, the entire thing we call it as a resource available on that host. Okay, so yes, get, and it is nothing but whatever is the resource part. Okay, and that's what is going to be the request made to the server, and then it's just simply waiting for a response to come from the server. Okay, fine. So Java on server side is what? It's about receiving such request on the server. Fine. When such a request is received on the server, okay, there will be some processing which would be done here. Fine, there can be a processing which can be done here, but ultimately it must send back a response to the, it should be sending back a response to the client, a HTTP response. Fine, if we are thinking in terms of HTTP protocol. Okay, so Java on server side is nothing but receiving a request, handling a request, doing some processing, and then sending back a response. Okay, so for this, yes, what we'll need to know on server side? No, what we need to know, we are going to be okay. So here, just think that yes, this is some. These are some components which are going to be developed in Java. What is required? What is the thing which is required by the processing here? First thing, it's receiving a request, which is, let's say, an HTTP request. So what is necessary? It should be able to understand what is HTTP. Fine. The thing here should be able to understand what is HTTP. It should be able to analyze what has come as part of the request, HTTP request. Oh, you have been able to send parameters. Fine. Whatever you are sending, all that information, the headers, the meaning of those headers, everything should be understood by the, fine. Oh, what is the format of HTTP request should be known. Fine. And then what? From that extract information. So all this should be available in Java. The information, whatever is being sent from the HTTP request should be something which should be known in Java. Okay, and then you should be, then maybe then you have your own Java processing, whatever you like. You might use JDBC to access database. You might use various things to make, fine, or maybe you even can be making connection to another server using your knowledge about HTTP client side, get some information from another server, or do whatever you like. But yes, you should be capable of receiving a HTTP request. That's one thing. And then ultimately, what is the thing that has to be done? Fine. You should be able to send back a proper HTTP response to the client. Okay. So all this is what is the responsibility on the server side. Yes. So starting with accepting a request, understand the whole of the HTTP request, fine, parsing it, being able to get what is the information contained within the request, fine. Okay. Okay. So what will be required here? Let's see this. Fine. What's necessary here now? So let's look at the job to be done on the server side now. Fine. It's all about server side now. Okay. So what we have here is we got servlet specifications. Fine. To take care of the Java on the server side, fine, especially when I say Java on the server side here, I'm not looking at the whole of the Java on the server side. There are a lot many things which are available as part of Java on server side. Okay, we are looking at web related things. Okay, we are only looking at the web related things. Fine. But yes, if you look at the whole of the Java on the server side, lot many other things. Okay. And you're just looking at web related things. Okay. Fine. So to handle the web related things, fine, everything related to web on the server side for Java, okay, we have specification called the servlet specifications. Okay, there are various versions of the specifications. Fine, and yeah, in this specifications there was a major change. Okay, we had servlet specification 1.0 coming somewhere in 98 or 90, somewhere around 98. Okay, but then we had a major revision. Okay, which came in servlet specifications 2.0. Okay, when we say servlet specifications 2.0, okay, so current specification latest I think is 3.1, and latest version is 3.1. But what happened in 2.0? Let's look at that. In 2.0 they introduced a concept of web application. And so we would like to be looking at the concept of a web application. What is this web application? And so the idea here is to understand what is a web application. There's some structure which they have defined, okay, for a web application. Right? Okay, so fine. Now this servlet specification, what does it say? The servlet specification has, we have two aspects about the servlet specification. One aspect is related to something which is not about all the developers. See, it's not related to the developers as such, right? But it is a specification which is meant for someone who implements the whole of the servlet specification. There is an implementation of the servlet specification on the server side, okay, and other will be the developers who would become the users of that. What I mean by saying, okay, implementation of servlet specification, yes, what do we need here? We need, one requirement was we need someone to understand the HTTP protocol, be able to receive a request, understand the HTTP protocol, and create appropriate Java objects for us. A normal developer need not go into the nitty-gritties of how HTTP works. Looking into, oh, what is the method? Fine. Where do I find the method? Parsing the whole of the request. You don't have to parse the request and then try to find out. It's not like, okay, having a socket connection. See, it's ultimately at a lower level, it's a socket connection which is happening. Fine. On which all this information is being sent. So there has to be someone who understands HTTP protocol, but that need not be, that's not your responsibility. Okay, when I say your means not a normal developer's responsibility. That is the responsibility which is given to a server vendor. I'll put it as a server now, fine. So we have a server vendor. Okay, we can think of a server vendor. When I say server vendor, he is nothing but a vendor for what is also known as a servlet container, or you might call it as a web container. Servlet container or a web container. Examples of servlet container or web container are nothing but, they're nothing but the implementation of my servlet specification, and the examples are most commonly used as Tomcat. Okay, we even have Glassfish. Okay, now when I say Tomcat, it is lighter because Tomcat is not implementing the whole of, I didn't mention this, Java EE. Fine, we have something called Java EE. I was mentioning that there's a whole lot of things which can be done, which are available as Java on server side. So, okay, Java on server side is covered by Java EE. Okay, one of the things within that is the servlet specifications, fine, which Tomcat is doing. So Tomcat is nothing but implementation of my servlet specification alone. It's not the whole of Java EE. It doesn't cover the whole of Java EE. But yes, if I look at Glassfish, if I look at JBoss, fine, there are fine such things like this. These are some popular things. Or there used to be this WebSphere. Now I think it's not so popular, which is from IBM. Okay, so if you look at such servers, these are nothing but implementation of, except for Tomcat, others are implementation of the whole Java EE specification. Okay, Tomcat is, okay, it's implementing web related only. It's not the whole of the Java EE. Okay, not all specifications. It's web related specifications. That's what Tomcat is. Okay, there are many other such things. Okay, fine. So yes, so we have a clear cut role. One role which is given to container developers, right? Someone who develops container. Fine, Tomcat is an example. So they have their own role. So that's one role, and other is the role of a web application developer. So we have a servlet container and so servlet container developer, right? You can say, okay, so there's one role which is the servlet container developer, and other role is the web application developer. Okay, so what's the responsibility of servlet container? Okay, fine. Looking at responsibility for servlet container, yeah. Fine. It would be responsible for, fine, majorly, yeah. So web container developer, web container, fine. What is the responsibility of web container? So web container, first thing, receive HTTP request or request rather. Okay, okay. Here I've used HTTP, but you can think, yes, it is receiving some request. Need not necessarily be HTTP, but most commonly it has to be HTTP. HTTP is something which needs to be supported. Idea is the servlet specification is not only about HTTP. HTTP is mandatory, but other protocol which is based on a request response paradigm can always be supported. Okay, there can be other protocols which are based on request response paradigm. They may always be supported on in this kind of a model. So you might have a container. You might have a container which can support non-HTTP protocol. Okay, fine. Over and above HTTP. So HTTP is a must. So yes, receive request, process. No. Yeah. Receive request. It has to parse this request. Okay. Parsing. After parsing, it creates. Okay. Appropriate Java objects. It just creates appropriate Java objects. See, it has to convert it into something which the web application developer should find it easy to use. The web application developer need not be knowing about the HTTP protocol in detail. But the information, whatever is available through the HTTP protocol, should be made available, right, to the web application developer. So making all that available, create appropriate Java objects, okay. Then, okay, it has to identify correct web application. It has to identify the correct web application and resource within the application. Yes. So this will help us define what is a web application. Okay. Fine. And then make these objects available to the to what? Okay. Let me introduce here to the servlet. Okay, let me not put servlet here. आज बदल गया ना सब. I think it's here. Oops. Okay. Made some changes in this interface. Yeah, make these objects available to the resource, or rather identified resource, and then wait for resource to generate an output, and we'll try to see what all this and I'm just trying okay, we'll try to look at what exactly is happening, and I'm just trying to put it in words initially, and then we'll see in terms of what exactly in Java this all means to us. Okay, fine. Wait for resource to generate an output, and okay, the resource has generated output. There's something which is happening on server side. So what's the next thing? What's the ultimate final thing that the server is supposed to do now? Sending the response. Fine. Putting in the appropriate format. It has to know HTTP. For example, whatever is the protocol. Fine. It has to know and put the response according to that protocol. Okay. Then format. I'll put it as formatting a response. And here HTTP is an example. Fine. Formatting a HTTP response to send the output. Okay, fine. This will explain a lot about a life cycle. And we have something called life cycle. Okay. Life cycle of a servlet. Fine. We'll also talk about directory structure here. Okay, there are many things, fine, which have been mentioned. Okay, let's look at what all we have written. Yeah, receive HTTP request. That's fine. It is waiting for a connection. Maybe there is a server socket which has been used. Receive the request on that. Fine. Using the input stream, it's reading. On the server side, it's reading. Then it has fine, the raw data which is coming, which is a HTTP request, is to be converted into parse and create appropriate Java objects. Oh, what's happening here? When I say creates appropriate Java objects, fine. There's one specific object which is going to be used here, fine. And we'll keep switching here. So we have one specific Java object which is being created, fine. Okay, now, okay, I'm also introducing what we have. We have a few packages. We have a package called Java x.servlet, okay, which is independent of any protocol, whereas protocols, HTTP specific things are part of Java x.servlet.http package. So we got two packages, Java x.servlet package and Java x.servlet.http package. Fine, these are not part of the standard JDK. These are not included in the JDK. This is part of a separate specification, which is our servlet specification. Fine, so only if you are using some web container, okay, then these packages would be useful. And these are useful for a web application developer. Okay, what is a web application? Yeah, looking at that, what we had written there, what does the server have to do? It has to identify a web application. For identification of a web application is simply a collection of related resources. And it is simply a collection of related resources. It's just one collection of resources. Fine. So for example, it's available through the URL. It's how it is identified. It's identified from the URL. So when we write HTTP:// we give a host. Fine. Then we use slash. Okay. Now it's a hierarchical path which you can use. So in this, your first part, the initial part is your web application. Slash, that's a resource within an application. So we said what is there after the host name? Slash. It's nothing but any resource. Now all those resources, group them. Okay, for example, maybe you want to create an application for an inventory. Okay, fine. In that case, you will have a path which looks like slash inventory. Okay, and then slash. There are various resources which are related to inventory available on the server side. For a client, yes, the client has these various URLs which he is able to use. What are the URLs? Oh, there are several URLs, but one group of URLs is slash inventory slash something. So this slash inventory is something which we call as a web application. Okay, fine. So first part, yes, one of the things which the container has to do, identify the web application. Within the web application, it has to identify the resource. Okay, so whatever is the URL which he might have used, okay, that URL, whatever he has used, may correspond to some kind of a static resource, or it may correspond to a Java component. You might have Java component and you might have some static resources. Fine. Our web application is made up of static things. Oh, you might have images, you might have so many other things, right? See, it's nothing but some URL. So fine, now onwards, yes, we'll look at this part only. Fine, we'll not look at the host part. Let's look at the other part. That is /inventory /images /something dot jpg, okay, or maybe /inventory / create create bill or something. Fine, create, maybe something like this. Oh, there might be some resource name. It's what is this? Oh, that's simply a resource name. That's simply some name, right? It's some path which is there. Oh, this one seems to be like a static thing because yes, it's looking like an image. Oh, that JPG extension is there and therefore it must be an image. Fine, but yes, this is simply some text which has arrived. Okay, server will have to identify, okay, this thing. Server has to, the server's main job is to identify the application first. It has identified this is an application. Now, web applications, coming to a web application from the developer's point of view. Okay. If a developer has to develop a web application for this, for inventory, it's what is inventory? Oh, it is inventory is an application where the URLs are to be supported. It's just nothing but you need to understand so many URLs. What are all those URLs? /inventory /something will come to me. Okay, all of them, that entire thing, for developing such an application, for a web developer, for a web application developer, what he needs to do has been standardized. There is a definite directory structure available. Fine. What he needs to do is, he needs to have some directory called inventory. Create a folder by that name of the web application. You want any kind of a static resource, okay, for example, that images /something. Oh, in that case, within this folder, create a subfolder for images and keep that JPG file here. It will be available using that URL. What's the URL? http:// the host where your application has been deployed. Okay, fine, / the application name is inventory, that's your folder, and within that anything which you have kept. Okay, so all your static resources can be organized like this. You need to have a folder by that name and have all your things organized. Okay, this I'm talking about static resources. Static resources, what do we mean by static resources?
Which are images which are
HTML, fine, plain HTML things, media files, any kind of files, but not about the Java components. Oh, there can be Java components there also. For example, if you have an applet, it's a Java component, and yes, that Java component would be identified using a resource here. Applet is such a resource, fine. But what we are looking at here is we want some processing to be done by a component on the server side. Fine. That component which we have is a servlet. Servlet would not be available for, okay, how servlet differs from other components. Let's see this. Right? If my request is saying inventory slash images slash something dot jpg, what does it mean? What will the server have to do? Okay, look in that path, then the content is straight away available to me. Fine. If it is HTTP protocol which is being used, what am I supposed to be doing? Create appropriate headers. This content goes in the content part and I have sent it. Fine. Formatting of response is very simple, straightforward. The content part is available, send this content. It's straight away a content. What is being addressed here is a content. Fine. Everything, the static thing is just straight away a content. It's a file. That content needs to be sent using HTTP protocol. Fine. Whereas, what is a servlet? No, servlet is not a content. Applet is a content. Applet on server side is a content. Applet on server side is a content from the point of view of HTTP protocol. Your entire applet class, that's an applet class. This class needs to be loaded on the client side. So the class has to be sent to the client as a content. Yes, it will be received by the client, and then the client knows, the browser knows how to use an applet within itself, how to create the object of the applet by loading the class and all that thing. That processing is on the browser's responsibility. So that's also a Java component. But now we are looking at Java components which are not going to become content. They are not content. They rather are content generators. And they are nothing but content generator. They are responsible for generating a content. What will be done, for example, here is, yes, we will have servlet. Fine. So you, for example, okay, for example, when I said slash create, what is that slash create thing? It doesn't seem to be like a file. No, there would not be a slash create, which is, there's no file called create in my inventory directory. You won't have such a thing. Okay. But yes, what it corresponds to is a servlet. This path corresponds to a servlet. Managing that this corresponds to some particular servlet is done through some configuration file within my web application. Oh, that means within my folder, web application folder, I do have some space, okay, which is not going to be used as content. It is not something which can be sent to the client. So my web application looks like this. We have inventory. Okay, the directory here looks like this. Within inventory, you got all your static resources, plus you got one special folder called web-inf in capital. This is all case sensitive. Okay. And then you got lot of things over here. This folder is special. The folder here is special in the sense all other things are available as resources by using a URL. I can access, see, my URL will be http://host/inventory/ I can use any folder name, but if I use folder name in my URL, fine, this is from client's perspective, okay? So from client side, if I'm using a URL and saying, oh, I want something from WEB-INF, you ask for anything by saying /web-inf. You have a folder web-inf in that place. Okay, you got a folder inventory for your web application. You got all your resources there, static resources. But if someone tries, you can try images. Oh, there's an images folder, you can try that. You can try to access anything from any of the folders. But if someone says, I want, using a URL, fine, client says, oh, I want something from web-inf, you are going to get a 404 file not found. That's not available. This is a private folder for server side. This is simply a simple private folder available for server side where our servlets can reside. Find our other Java components which are needed on server side related to our application. Here, for example, our application is inventory. So anything related to inventory, most of them are Java components required on server side plus the configuration information. All such things will be available and will have to be managed in the WEB-INF folder. Fine. So web application is nothing but, what's a web application? Yes, from the client point of view, it is a collection of resources, collection of URLs starting with a particular name. Fine. The first part, slash, the very first part, slash inventory here, that's my web application. From client point of view, it's resources. From application developer's point of view, what he has to do? He needs to have a folder for that application. Fine. All the static resources will be within folder. All static resources are available. You organize them in your directory structure the way you want. Fine. You have all the HTMLs, the images, the audio files, video files. You can even have PDFs, Excel files, any kind of content. Just keep it there. Okay. Organize them into whatever directories you like. Fine. But then you also have things which have to be dynamic in nature, which would require that if this request comes, I need to do some processing here. I need a Java component to do some processing for me, make a connection to a database, fetch the information from a database, and then give me some Java objects which will have to be formatted and sent back as part of a content. Maybe you need to generate HTML. You can be generating anything. Fine. So you got those kind of components, and those are nothing but the servlets. And for that, yes, where do we organize such things? So for organizing such things, we got a folder called WEB-INF. Okay. Okay. So within WEB-INF, yeah. Okay. Now within WEB-INF, what we have, there are a few special things. Okay. So in WEB-INF folder, there will be one file. Okay. So there's one file called web.xml. Okay, there's one file called web.xml. This is nothing but a configuration file. Fine. This file talks about what all Java components are available. Fine. The most simplest thing which we can talk about, what is there in the web.xml? Oh, it corresponds to your application. There's one web.xml corresponding to one web application. Right? Clear? If it's inventory, within inventory, WEB-INF has to be there, and within WEB-INF, your web.xml is available. Fine. Whatever is, and again, all these things are case sensitive, lowercase web.xml. Okay. So this file will contain information about what all other Java components you are going to have. Most common Java components would be servlets, server-side components, which you need to mention here are the servlets. So you'll say, oh, I got so-and-so servlet. That's fine. You got this servlet. But then what URL should access that servlet? Okay, what URL should be accessing that servlet? Okay, fine. So all that information is part of web.xml. So fine, we'll be looking at the structure of web.xml also. Fine. What are the various tags available in web.xml? Okay, and then the other thing. Oh, where do I keep my servlet classes? They are my Java component. So where do I organize my Java components? So within web.xml, WEB-INF, there are two options here. You have one folder called classes. Okay, within classes, that's a place where you got all your server-side class files. class files related to your servlet classes will be here. The servlet class needs some other classes. They are dependent on some other classes. They can be here. Fine. Your servlet classes use some libraries. They are dependent on some libraries which are not part of the standard JDK. See, what is available to you? Anytime, any Java component is always going to have available the entire Java library, that is the JDK library, plus in this case, it has available all the servlet libraries also. javax.servlet and anything. javax.servlet.http and anything. Okay, there'll be so many classes, interfaces which are available here. So all those things are going to be available to you all the time. Any component which you develop. But over and above that, you may still have your own components being used. Fine. Or for example, if you are using a JDBC driver, the driver is a jar file. Fine. Or maybe you are using some API for generating a PDF. You want to generate PDF and therefore you need an API. So if you need API for generating an PDF, you need a jar file. What do I do with that jar file? The classes has only class files in that. So what we have here is another place called lib folder, where if you use any libraries, they may be put here. It's nothing but, the rule is very simple. If you got class files, put them in the classes folder. If you got jar files, put them in the lib folder. Maybe you've written your servlets and then create a jar file for it. It's not necessary that you should have class files available. You put them in, so many servlets, put all of them into a jar file, and then you don't put anything in classes, but put them straight in the lib folder. A jar file, so jar file stays here. Okay, lib is a place for jar files, and classes is the place for class files. Okay, which would be needed related to your application. Fine, so this is the place for Java components on server side. Classes and lib, that's a place for Java components on server side, specific to your application. Okay, specific to your application. The other Java components, which will be from the servlet library, there'll be all the time you have the Java components from the JDK available. Fine, clear? So this is the minimum structure you have for your web application. Fine. What's a directory structure? Your directory, you keep your static resources there, organize them in directory structure the way you like. Then for Java components which would stay on server side, one is, yes, you will need a configuration. Okay, so what is that? Where do we keep all such things? In the private folder called WEB-INF. Fine. Within WEB-INF we have where is the configuration? web.xml. Fine. And Java components, the Java class files and the libraries. You have the classes folder to keep all your class files and lib folder to keep all your libraries which are available in jar form. Classes? Bin? There is no bin, there's classes. Okay, so yes, when you're compiling, let's say, fine, when you're compiling, your destination -d will be classes. Okay, if you're compiling straight away for the web application, right? This will be, so if you have some package structure, right? So your package structure starts in classes, within classes, fine? You have a package, so you got your org/something/something, fine? So if you got anything, you can, that's your package structure there within classes. Clear? Fine. Because what the as far as the container is concerned, what is the role of container? The container is simply going to load classes related to your application only. Fine. If your path is /inventory, yes, anything related to inventory only will be loaded. What can be loaded by the container? It will not look at any other path. It doesn't look at the class path. What is the class path setting? When you start Tomcat, Tomcat is not going to look at the class path setting. Okay, fine. There's nothing to do with the class path. You don't. It is not going to look at class path for locating the servlet classes. The rule is very simple here. Fine. This is what they standardized in 2.0. Prior to 2.0, oh, your servlet, they need to be in a class path. All such things were there. Fine. So in 2.0, this is something which they changed. They said, no, we have a structure and this is how things should be organized. And so the concept of a web application, that's the main thing which was introduced from servlet specification 2.0. Earlier it used to be, okay, oh, these are servlets, that's it. There was nothing like someone can think in terms of grouping them. Okay, fine. Maybe a quick look at the life cycle. And we'll have a quick look at the life cycle of our servlet. This part is clear. Structure of a web application. Okay, so coming back to that role, right? Yeah, what was this doing? What are the things done by the server? Receive HTTP request, parse, create appropriate Java objects. Yeah, what are those Java objects? Identify, what we have looked at actually, identify correct web application and resource within the web application. Now, when I say resource within the web application, fine, it's going to come by looking at the configuration file. In the configuration, it would be mentioned that if this is the kind of resource someone is looking at, then this is the corresponding servlet object. Which servlet object to use? Okay, so that's for that. And then make these objects available to the, make these objects, when I say these objects, what I'm referring to? I'm referring to the creation of appropriate objects. Okay, those objects which are created here, they have to be made available to our identified resource. What is the identified resource here? The servlet. Okay, the identified resource here is the servlet. And wait for the resource to generate an output. So it has to now make the servlet to generate a output, and then whatever output generated by the servlet has to be transported back to the client. Responsibility of transporting the content back, the response back to the, giving a response, getting a request and receiving request and sending response is the responsibility of container. Container is doing lot of things for us. Hence, it's container who is driving the whole thing. Okay, it's a Tomcat which is doing all the things. Fine. Your job is very simple now. Okay, let's see what exactly is happening. Creating appropriate Java object. Who is creating the objects? Container does it. And then yes, you do the processing. I'm making available the request. I'm making available the request related information. And I'm also giving you another object. Let's see this now. Okay, let's look at the lifecycle part. Yeah. So if you look at the life cycle, okay, what's exactly happening on the, let's consider this is a container. Okay, so in container, when we start a Java, fine, on the host machine, host is nothing but our server. On that host machine, when we start our web container, what the web container does? Okay, let's look at the activity which is done by the web container. The first thing the web container does is it has to look at which are the web applications which have been deployed, which are all those directories, right? Oh, I have an inventory directory, I have some other directories. It is looking for the deployed web applications. Fine. First thing it has to do is look for the deployed web applications. Fine. And for each of the deployed web applications, it creates some object. Okay. Now these are objects which you will find in Java x.servlet package. They have been mentioned as interfaces. They are available. Most of the things here are interfaces. So we have some objects. So for example, inventory is there. Okay, fine. I'll have to create one object of type. So it is an object of some class which implements servlet context interface. So one object for inventory application, another object for another application. For every application, you have an object of servlet context being created when the container starts. It's looking at, oh, these are the applications which have to be active. Okay, oh, I need to create one object. I'll create one object of servlet context. And this object is not just simply created, oh, I have to just create one object for it. When it is creating this object, it is looking at the configuration file for that application. We have that web.xml. Fine. And according to the web.xml, there will be a lot of information from web.xml which becomes available over here.
And we're talking about this object created by the object.
Fine. So this is at startup. This has not yet anything to do with servlet yet. Okay, or the request. It's not even the request coming here. There is nothing like, it has not, it is the container is not even ready to take a request at this moment. The container has just started, and what it has done? Created the objects of servlet context. Fine. And then it is becoming ready. Okay, it's okay. While looking at the configuration file, it looks at the configuration file. It starts with this and starts looking at the configuration file. What's there in the configuration file? The configuration file looks like web app, everything within web app and /web app. Fine. Top level tag here is in the web.xml. Fine. This is nothing but web.xml. Okay. For web.xml, the top level tag is web app and /web app. Within that, first thing, there'll be some tool which will be provided by the administrative tool will be there for your container. Okay. In that administrative tool, it will list, oh, these are all the applications which are currently active. I've created the servlet context available for all of these. And you have tools like, oh, this particular application, let me bring it down for some time for administrative reasons. So though you have the folder, but no, I'm not going to accept any request related to this currently. Fine. Such things have to be available. So you'll have administrative tools for managing your web applications. Okay, so when you manage your web applications, there, it's not a folder name which may be used. You might give some kind of a name which is more appropriate, find more descriptive, find writing some description and all those things. So what we have within web app is a place called, we have a display name. A display name for your web application. So you can write some name and /display name. So one of the tags in web.xml is display name. Fine, giving the display name for your web application. So when it is being listed, there this is being used. Okay, in the tool, this is something which may be used here. Fine. Now coming more closer to our servlet thing, and it will also mention about what are the components. Okay, now another thing, you might have some configuration. So you might have, for your web application, right? You might like to have some parameters, configurable parameters, which can be changed at the place of deploying. You have developed one web application. Not necessary it's going to be deployed only on one server. Fine. You can sell that application to multiple customers of yours, each one using that same application. But then some parameter needs to be changed. So you might keep some configurable parameters. So if you got some configurable parameters which are at the application level, okay, then you can use here, okay, what is known as init-param. Not init-param, this is context-param, sorry. Context-param has inner tag called param-name. So give some parameter name, configurable parameter name / param-name and param-value, okay, and / context-param. For each configurable parameter which you would like to have for your web application, you have this kind of a thing. Fine. Repeat this context param a number of times. As many parameters as you have, so many context param entries you can create, giving a name and the value. So people will, you create one such file, people will just say, okay, what is the appropriate value in their case that they can change. Fine. In a place, in a different place, that param value may be different, but yes, mostly the parameter name will be maintained same. So you have a list of configurable parameters, give a name to the parameter and have some typical values may be there, and then you might have those things getting changed at different places where they are deployed. For example, maybe in my case of inventory application, uh, what kind of costing is being used? Whether I follow the LIFO or the FIFO model. Fine. In inventory, yes, last in, first out. How do I do the costing? Fine. So, yes, costing, and it will say LIFO, or someone will say FIFO. Fine. Which model to use? Clear? Or more, that's not so common. What is more commonly also being done here is we use this because you have your same application, but it is to be, as far as database is concerned, maybe you use a different database in different, fine. For the same application, you might be using MySQL, but the same application is also available if someone got an Oracle server. Fine. So what will change? The JDBC driver which I use. Okay, so I have to load a different driver class and I have to have a different URL for it. Oh, such information can be here. Yes, you can have. To make a connection, I need this username and I would like to use this password. So it can be different at different places. So anything which is configurable can go here. Fine, but something which is at the application level. And then After context, fine. So this is, you have a list of context param. Fine, the purpose is clear. Okay. Next, let's come to our Java component, which we would like to start looking at. So the web application developer may have created a Java component for a servlet. Fine. I have created some component, fine, which can be used for generating a response. Okay. It's going to be the one which is going to have the information available from the container about the request, and is also taking the responsibility of putting an appropriate response. Okay, so we have servlet entry, and within servlet entry, the inner tag would be servlet name. Okay, so with this, you are giving a name to your object. You're saying create one object of, you give the name of the class. So you're saying create one object of this class identified by this name. Okay, one object of this particular class, one object. So this is my servlet number 1, let's say. I'll say servlet 1, maybe. That's the name I have given, servlet 1. Okay, fine. This is some class which is implementing an interface called servlet. Okay, there's a class which is implementing the interface called servlet. Later, fine, we'll also look at another aspect. There's one thing, servlet, and instead of servlet, there's one more option which can be used here. It's called a servlet name. You'll give servlet name, but instead of specifying servlet as a class file, okay, because you're responsible for giving a response, fine, maybe for just for responses, sometimes instead of writing in Java, you might like to write in terms of using all the tags, okay, which is managed through a JSP. So one option is to use servlet class, or either this or one of the two things can be done, or in option of this, you may use a tag called JSP file and give the path to a something.jsp. Some path can be there. You can have some path. But this path here, the slash here, is nothing but the root of inventory folder, root of your application. Within the application, give me the path where it is available. So you have a JSP file. That's also possible. You may not write any Java code at all, and you got a servlet. You got an object of servlet being created. You're saying, this is my servlet 1. Create one object. This is nothing but asking it, when the container would start, it is looking at the web.xml file, creating one servlet context object. But looking at that web.xml file, it's also taking some more action. And what is that action? Creating the object and identifying it. Oh, this is my object called servlet 1. Okay, fine. See, this class, it may be a class which, fine, and then you have the, okay, within this again, for this component which you have created, you might have some configurable parameters which are only known, which are understood only by this particular component. Your servlet class here, maybe it likes to use certain parameters, configurable parameters. So if you got some configurable parameters at your servlet level, you have an inner tag called init-param. Use the next level as param-name, So give a parameter name similar to our context param, fine. And we have a param value slash init-param. So like this, any number of configurable parameters even for that component alone. See, there are configurable parameters for application. There can be configurable parameters for component. Fine, our servlet component. So if anything for servlet, oh, you have your context init param. That's known as init param. Okay, for example, let's write a servlet called hello servlet. Fine, and then what do we do? Greet someone. So someone says hello world, or someone says hi world. That greeting, hi or hello, can be configurable, or you want to say namaste or something. Fine. What is the greeting? A greeting message? Fine. It's just used for greeting, right? Fine. And then maybe the name or something comes there. So that can be your parameter, the greeting, and that's my greeting value. How do I greet? Fine. Anything. But there's only something which is understood by this particular servlet. It's not for the application level. And any you may have some configurable parameter for component itself. So it allows you to specify configurable parameters for component by using init-param. Fine. But this is within the servlet tag. Okay. Another thing which is load on startup. And then we have a slash load on startup. You specify value. It's a numerical value. For example, I'll just say 1. Fine. And let me end the tag first. Then we have the slash servlet over here. Okay. This load on startup, okay, would mean that when the web application starts, okay, whenever the web application is started, yes, at the start of the web container, it's loading my web application if it is supposed to be active. Okay, the servlet context object being created. At that point of time itself, you can create the object of this servlet. The object of this servlet may be created at that time itself. Now that number which we give here, 1, like this, see, this is load on startup for my servlet. Another servlet entry can also be there because I have multiple such servlet components. Okay, when you have multiple such servlet components, you can say, okay, this is also to be loaded on startup, this is also to be loaded on startup, but take this one first and this one second. That's the number which we are giving. No, give numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 like this over here. No. One. Sequence. The sequence in which they needs to be created, the object needs to be created. So these need to be created and initialized at startup. These need to be created and initialized at startup. Okay, we'll have more details later. Fine. But like this, you'll have servlet entries. Multiple servlet entries can be there. One thing you note here is you can have another servlet entry using the same servlet class, but you can't have the same name. You're having multiple servlet entry. You're saying create one object using this class. Create another object maybe using the same class. I want so many objects. Each object of servlet which you want, give a servlet name which is unique. That's my servlet 1. That's my servlet 2. And you can have servlets being created, give some name to them. So this would result in object being created and identified by this name. But then it creates, and then what? So yeah, you can think the initial job when the container starts, create object of servlet context, finds the servlet entries, and also creates, where load on startup is mentioned, it would also create object of servlet. So what's happening in this container? One object of servlet context, and maybe there are a few objects of servlets being created now. Fine, these are nothing but object of the servlet which has been created. Fine, they are linked to this, they are available to this particular context, they are related to that application. This is my application. In this application, so many servlet objects created on startup. And then it does this for all the various web applications, servlet context and the corresponding servlet objects. Servlet objects identified because of the configuration file. Oh, these are the various servlet objects which need to be created. And then it is now becoming ready for receiving request. Okay, this is the startup of container. Now it's ready for receiving a request. And now coming to what was told there. Oh, using HTTP protocol.
I will mention in the start.
Okay, then it is free to create them or may not even create them at the startup.
When it will be
Yes, it will have information related to mapping. Fine, I have not yet told about mapping.
when it will be booked to the URL.
Yeah?
When it will be booked to the
Yes, URL. First time. Okay. Okay, so then what would happen? Let's see. So when a request comes, what's the first thing it has to do? HTTP request has arrived. What would the container do? Parse and create appropriate object. That appropriate object is nothing but is an object of servlet request. It creates an object of servlet request. This is nothing but in terms of Java now. Fine, not in terms of those text. Fine, it was all text, right? That HTTP request. Okay, fine. From that format, not knowing the format, see what you have written is only this. What the container's responsibility? Creating a servlet context object, receiving request, creating object of servlet request, and it also makes a provision in this servlet request. What it has put, it has populated it with the headers, it has populated it with all the information, the parameters which have been sent as part of HTTP request. Oh, this is nothing but populating and creating, parsing and putting that information in terms of a Java object. Conversion of the HTTP request into a Java object. That object is called servlet request. It's a Java object now. Right? Something on the TCP/IP protocol which has been received is converted into object. Okay, and it is not only creating one object, it is still creating one more object. It's creating one more object ready for response. It's creating an object of what we call as servlet response. It creates object of servlet response with an empty buffer. See, if there is something received from the server, some content has been received, there will be a buffer here in which has been populated from the request. Fine, populated by what has been received. So this is servlet request is the object which has been populated by the request received from the client. This is done by container. It's doing it for us. Okay, it's also allocating one object, a blank buffer, and putting it inside a servlet response object, making both of these objects available. Now it has to go through the in the in the configuration file, there will be a mapping which has been specified. You may have a mapping specified. So it has servlet mapping. Okay, fine. Servlet mapping, it would say servlet name. So identify your servlet object. This object is available to me using a particular URL pattern. So slash something, you can have some URL. So you link your URL to a particular servlet object. You can have multiple servlet mapping using the same servlet name. This URL, this servlet object can be used for servicing. If someone uses this URL, or even if he uses a different URL, I still want the same component to be used. You can have multiple servlet mapping entries. They all map to the same servlet name. That's allowed. Different URLs, same component to be used. So which URL, which resource name should be used for this resource name, what is the corresponding servlet component to be used? That identification is mentioned by servlet mapping. It's just one object creation. And servlet is object creation. This is resource mapped to a name, to an object. Resources mapped to a servlet object. Okay, and then what? Yeah. Let's go back. So that's what's done. So let's say it identified this is my servlet, right? It identified that, right? Because of the mapping, it says identify that's my object. What it will do? It will make these two objects available to the servlet. Making them available, how that's done? Through a life cycle. We'll see that life cycle. Fine, we haven't yet started with that life cycle. Fine, but that's what it is. Like, it's making them available. And what is this guy's role? Do whatever it likes, maybe access database or anything, processing, and then it needs to generate an output. What is the output, what is the content which has to be sent? That content, it needs to populate in this buffer. It is going to populate in this buffer the content. It has made available the object. This is the buffer, please populate. Who will populate? Servlet will populate, or the JSP will populate. Fine. And once that populating of this buffer is over, this guy's responsibility is to send it back to the client. The container's responsibility is to send it back to the client, not the servlet. Servlet is not sending it. Servlet is not receiving it. Clear? Servlet is completely shielded from the nitty-gritties of the HTTP protocol. Fine. That's the container's responsibility. Clear? You can see the demarcation between what's the role of container and what's the role of the web application developer. Web application developer is creating this, he is writing a component which is just going to be receiving these two objects. Fine? Okay. Fine. Continue tomorrow. नहीं वो टाइम खत्म हुआ उसका टाइम खत्म हुआ